In 2005, Baghdad was a city on the edge of collapse. Al-Qaeda in Iraq had transformed from a shadowy insurgent group into a sophisticated industrial-scale organization. Streets that had once been familiar were now riddled with improvised explosive devices, ambushes, and hidden snipers. Every convoy, every patrol, and every building could conceal a threat capable of ending a mission in an instant. The Pentagon closely monitored the situation and issued a classified warning: do not send a small force of British SAS operators into the heart of Baghdad. Analysts argued that despite the SAS's legendary reputation, the unit was far too small, lacking the helicopters, vehicles, and firepower needed to survive in such a volatile environment. A 60-man team was simply not enough to face hundreds of insurgents armed with mortars, machine guns, and homemade explosives. The warning was blunt. Pentagon planners painted a vivid picture of what could go wrong: a British team pinned down in a densely populated neighborhood, isolated from reinforcements, running low on ammunition, and under constant threat from every corner. Analysts predicted that even minor mistakes could turn deadly. Coalition forces were stretched across the city, and the prospect of rescuing a compromised unit seemed slim. The memos went so far as to outline worst-case scenarios, including helicopter losses during extraction and prolonged firefights that could escalate into a full-blown urban disaster. Conventional military wisdom favored overwhelming numbers and firepower. Small elite units, no matter how skilled, were seen as vulnerable, almost expendable in the calculus of large-scale warfare. Yet the SAS argued that conventional wisdom did not apply to their methods. Their training emphasized speed, precision, and psychological impact. Unlike larger forces, which relied on heavy vehicles and rigid command structures, SAS teams could move quickly through narrow alleys, enter buildings with surgical precision, and strike before the enemy even realized they were present. Analysts failed to grasp how much of warfare depended not on the size of a unit, but on the skill, discipline, and ruthlessness of the operators. Every move, every entry, every decision made by the SAS was calculated down to the second, designed to achieve maximum effect with minimal exposure. Their presence was more than physical, it was psychological. Enemies who had grown accustomed to terrorizing neighborhoods suddenly faced an opponent they could not predict, outthink, or overpower. As debates raged in Pentagon offices and coalition command centers, the tension was palpable. Some officials warned of the political fallout if the mission failed, while others argued it could serve as a blueprint for modern special operations. Every scenario considered the worst outcomes: casualties, mission failure, and public embarrassment. But what these risk assessments overlooked was the sheer adaptability of the human operator. Numbers, helicopters, and firepower can be counted. Skill, training, and instinct cannot. The Pentagon's analysts assumed that an elite team of 60 would be outmatched, yet they underestimated the value of relentless preparation and experience gained from decades of specialized training. Over the following weeks, the SAS prepared for deployment with an intensity that few outside the unit could comprehend. Each operator underwent rigorous drills, reviewing maps, memorizing building layouts, and rehearsing countless entry techniques. Room clearance, hostage extraction, and close-quarter combat were honed to near perfection. Every second in training translated into a fraction of a second in battle, a difference that could mean life or death. Meanwhile, the coalition watched skeptically. The British were respected, yes, but in a city as complex and lethal as Baghdad, could reputation alone carry the day? Most believed the SAS would at best perform small victories, but the threat of being overwhelmed remained high. When the first SAS teams moved into Baghdad, the city's insurgent networks had no idea what they were about to face. American officers watched as the operators executed reconnaissance and strikes with unprecedented speed. Neighborhoods that had been hotbeds of insurgent activity were suddenly disrupted, and the SAS's reputation for efficiency became reality in a way no Pentagon memo had predicted. The warnings that had loomed over planning discussions now seemed almost quaint. The British force, though small, operated like a surgical weapon, precise, ruthless, and completely adaptable to the chaos around them. By the end of the first weeks, it became clear that the initial Pentagon warning had been catastrophically wrong. The city, which analysts had assumed would be impossible to navigate for such a small unit, was being systematically disrupted. Insurgent networks were thrown into disarray. The ability of 60 operators to dismantle organized cells, gather intelligence, and strike with near-perfect timing exposed a blind spot in conventional military thinking. Human skill and rigorous training could outweigh sheer numbers and technology. The lesson was stark and clear. In Baghdad in 2005, the Pentagon's failure to appreciate the power of elite operators became a pivotal moment, one that would redefine modern urban warfare. The small British SAS team was not just surviving, they were dominating, reshaping the battlefield in ways that no calculation, no risk assessment, and no conventional metric could predict.
The formation of Task Force Black was unlike any military experiment the coalition had attempted before. This was not a large-scale conventional deployment with battalions and heavy vehicles. It was 60 men, drawn from the most elite British SAS squadrons, assembled to operate in the most dangerous city in the world. Their mission was clear but daunting: dismantle an insurgent network that had eluded American, Iraqi, and coalition forces for years. Baghdad in 2005 was a labyrinth of violence where insurgents blended seamlessly with civilians, and the smallest mistake could spark an ambush or mass casualties. Yet within this small force lay a capability so refined it would redefine what a military unit could achieve in urban warfare. The selection process for Task Force Black was ruthless. Only operators with extensive combat experience and flawless records in close-quarters battle were considered. Each man underwent exhaustive psychological evaluations to ensure they could maintain clarity and focus under extreme stress. Their physical training was unmatched, but it was their mental resilience that truly set them apart. Every operator needed to perform flawlessly under fire, to think several steps ahead of the enemy, and to make split-second decisions where hesitation could mean death. Beyond physical fitness and marksmanship, they trained relentlessly in coordination, communication, and rapid adaptability, skills that would allow 60 men to act like an entire battalion in the chaos of Baghdad. Operational planning began long before the first helicopter took off. Intelligence teams worked to map out insurgent strongholds, supply chains, and networks of influence. The SAS did not rely solely on raw firepower. They combined human intelligence, signals interception, and surveillance data to anticipate enemy movements. Every mission was rehearsed with obsessive detail. Teams ran mock operations in replica urban environments, practicing door breaching, hostage extraction, and the rapid neutralization of threats. Close-quarters battle became second nature. Operators drilled scenarios repeatedly until their reactions were instinctual. A single hesitation during a room clearance could cost lives, and the SAS drilled to ensure there would be none. When the unit was finally deployed, their presence alone began to disrupt the insurgency. Task Force Black did not move as a large, predictable force. They moved as a shadow, appearing and disappearing with surgical precision. Helicopters inserted teams at precisely calculated locations, often under cover of darkness, allowing operators to reach critical targets before the enemy realized what was happening. Each raid was meticulously timed, every step choreographed to minimize exposure and maximize impact. The insurgents were not only facing armed attackers, they were confronting a level of coordination, intelligence, and skill they had never encountered. In one operation, teams infiltrated multiple apartments simultaneously, isolating key operatives and dismantling entire cells before reinforcements could respond. The efficiency was staggering. The psychological impact on both the enemy and coalition forces cannot be overstated. American officers, initially skeptical, watched in awe as 60 men executed operations that had been deemed impossible. Insurgents who had previously operated with impunity suddenly faced relentless, targeted strikes. Entire neighborhoods became off-limits to enemy movement, and intelligence gathered during raids allowed Task Force Black to anticipate future attacks with uncanny accuracy. The combination of surprise, precision, and fear shattered the insurgents' sense of security. For the first time in months, coalition planners began to understand the value of elite human operators in a way that no report or assessment had conveyed. Coordination within Task Force Black was crucial as their combat skills. Each operator was responsible not only for executing their role, but also for maintaining real-time communication across the unit. Situational awareness was paramount. A single team's observation could inform operations across the city. They learned to read subtle cues in the urban environment, foot traffic, patterns of local commerce, even the movements of children as indicators of potential threats or insurgent activity. This level of situational intelligence allowed them to strike decisively while avoiding unnecessary casualties among civilians. The precision and discipline required were immense, but the team's rigorous training and trust in one another made it possible. The operational tempo was relentless. Over the first months, Task Force Black conducted dozens of raids, each one executed with minimal planning time due to the fluid and unpredictable nature of Baghdad's insurgency. Despite the pace, casualties were remarkably low. Operators moved through hostile environments with a combination of aggression and restraint, neutralizing threats quickly while preserving the lives of innocents whenever possible. The unit's efficiency in close-quarters combat became legendary. In numerous encounters, a room could be entered, threats neutralized, and the objective secured in under 20 seconds. American advisors, initially doubtful, began to realize that their assumptions about force size, firepower, and logistics had been fundamentally flawed. Perhaps the most striking aspect of Task Force Black's operations was their adaptability. Urban warfare is inherently chaotic, and no two missions unfolded in the same way. Operators frequently encountered situations that had not been anticipated. Insurgents using civilians as shields, unexpected barricades, or improvised traps designed to slow their advance. In every instance, the unit adapted without hesitation, improvising solutions on the fly while maintaining operational security. Their ability to innovate under pressure highlighted a stark contrast with conventional units, which often relied on rigid protocols and hierarchy. Task Force Black demonstrated that elite human operators could overcome obstacles that would stall much larger forces. Every operation also fed a feedback loop of intelligence and refinement. After each raid, the team debriefed meticulously, analyzing every second of action to identify what worked and what could be improved. These insights were immediately incorporated into future missions. The effect was exponential. The unit became faster, smarter, and more lethal with each engagement. Insurgent networks, which had previously seemed impervious, began to crumble under the weight of a strategy that combined precision, speed, and relentless pressure. By the end of the first 90 days, Task Force Black had disrupted a network of over 200 insurgents, a feat that conventional assessments had deemed impossible for a unit of its size. The success of Task Force Black forced coalition forces to rethink urban warfare doctrine. The Pentagon's initial warnings, which had focused on numbers, helicopters, and firepower, were now overshadowed by the reality of elite operators executing complex missions with astonishing efficiency. The human factor, training, discipline, coordination, and adaptability, had proven decisive. This small, highly trained unit had accomplished what larger formations could not.
dismantling a sophisticated insurgent network, gathering critical intelligence, and reshaping the battlefield in ways that were previously unimaginable. Task Force Black had not only achieved its operational goals, but also demonstrated a new model of modern warfare, where skill and precision could outweigh brute force and technology.
Baghdad's narrow alleys and densely packed neighborhoods were the ultimate testing ground for close-quarters battle. The insurgents had turned ordinary buildings into lethal traps, rigging apartments with hidden weapons, improvised explosives, and concealed firing positions. For Task Force Black, entering a single building was not just about defeating armed enemies, it was about mastering an environment designed to kill. Every room, every hallway, and every doorway presented an unpredictable threat. The stakes were impossibly high, and the SAS operators knew that hesitation or miscalculation could mean death. Yet it was in this chaos that their training became an unstoppable force. From the moment operators set foot in Baghdad, their preparation in close-quarters combat was evident. The SAS had long emphasized speed, precision, and coordination in confined spaces, but the urban war in Iraq demanded something even more refined. Teams drilled over and over again in mock urban environments, practicing room entry, target identification, threat neutralization, and extraction. Every movement was rehearsed until it became instinctive. The goal was simple, yet terrifying in its execution: clear a room, neutralize threats, and secure the objective in seconds. This was not brute force, it was a calculated choreography of violence, executed with the cold precision of trained professionals who had faced death countless times before. The benchmark that became almost legendary within coalition circles was 17 seconds. 17 seconds to enter a room, identify threats, and neutralize them. It was a standard so fast, so efficient, that American advisors and observers were initially skeptical. Could a handful of operators really enter a hostile environment, avoid booby traps, and defeat armed opponents in under 20 seconds? Watching the SAS in action quickly dissolved all doubts. Operators moved as a single organism, sweeping from doorway to doorway with seamless coordination. Each man knew the other's positions, firing arcs, and responsibilities without a word spoken. In these critical moments, instinct and training merged, and the chaos of Baghdad became a stage for surgical precision. Inside buildings, the environment itself was a weapon. Narrow hallways, stairwells, and low ceilings restricted movement, while insurgents used these constraints to their advantage. The SAS learned to read subtle signs of danger: a displaced rug, a partially closed door, the angle of a window. They were trained to anticipate ambushes, identify hidden shooters, and respond to threats before they became lethal. Every movement was calculated, and every second was critical. The 17-second standard was not arbitrary. It reflected the exact amount of time needed to enter, engage, and dominate a hostile room without hesitation. Operators who failed to internalize this rhythm risked injury or worse. Success required not just skill, but trust in one another and confidence that every team member would perform flawlessly under fire. Coordination extended beyond individual rooms. Entire building complexes had to be secured simultaneously to prevent insurgents from escaping or regrouping. Task Force Black divided objectives into teams, assigning clear responsibilities and rehearsing escape routes, fallback positions, and contingency plans. Intelligence from previous raids was incorporated in real time, allowing operators to anticipate enemy movements and adapt instantly. In some cases, teams had to clear multiple rooms in a single operation, moving from floor to floor while maintaining absolute situational awareness. This level of coordination required discipline, communication, and split-second decision-making. Each successful room clearance reinforced the psychological advantage of the SAS.
Insurgents who had once operated with impunity now faced operators capable of entering a room, identifying threats, and eliminating them before a shot could even be fired in response. Entire networks were destabilized, not just by casualties, but by fear. The unpredictability and precision of the SAS forced insurgents to rethink their strategies, slow down their movements, and conceal themselves in ways that limited their effectiveness. Each successful raid sent ripples through the city, demonstrating that a small, highly trained unit could achieve more than a much larger conventional force. American and coalition observers often described these operations with a mix of awe and disbelief. Military planners had long believed that numbers and firepower were paramount in urban warfare. Yet here were 60 operators moving in silence, clearing buildings with near impossible speed and achieving objectives that large battalions struggled to accomplish. The efficiency of Task Force Black highlighted a key lesson. In urban combat, training, adaptability, and coordination could outweigh sheer size and technology. The SAS's ability to enter, clear, and secure rooms in 17 seconds became a defining measure of their dominance in Baghdad. Operators themselves understood the stakes on a deeply personal level. Every mission carried the potential for lethal consequences. A single misstep, a misjudged corner, a delayed response, or overlooked threat could end a career or a life. Their training was designed to turn the impossible routine, to turn instinct into a predictable, reliable outcome. The drills, the simulations, and the repeated rehearsals were not exercises in arrogance, they were survival mechanisms. And in the reality of Baghdad's insurgency, survival depended on perfection. There was no room for error, and over time, the SAS proved repeatedly that their methods were not only effective, they were revolutionary. Beyond the immediate tactical success, the SAS's efficiency in close-quarters combat had strategic implications. Each successful operation weakened the insurgents' ability to plan and coordinate attacks. Intelligence gathered during raids provided critical insight into supply routes, safe houses, and communication networks. With each room cleared, the operators gained a clearer picture of the insurgency's structure, allowing them to anticipate and disrupt future operations. 17 seconds was not just a measure of speed, it represented the fusion of tactical excellence with strategic foresight. Every raid was simultaneously a direct strike and an intelligence-gathering mission, executed with unmatched skill. By the end of the first months of operations, the reputation of Task Force Black was established. The SAS's ability to dominate in confined, hostile environments had rewritten expectations for urban warfare. Insurgents avoided certain areas, fearing that a sudden raid could result in total annihilation. American officers who had once doubted the small unit's effectiveness now regarded their efficiency as astonishing. The 17-second room clearance became more than a statistic. It was a symbol of the human factor in warfare, the combination of training, discipline, coordination, and courage that could overcome any conventional disadvantage. Task Force Black had not just survived in Baghdad's most dangerous environments, they had redefined what a highly trained team could achieve against a numerically superior enemy.
By the time Task Force Black turned its focus to the insurgent network, Baghdad had already begun to feel the psychological weight of their operations. Intelligence indicated that approximately 200 insurgents, organized into cells with established supply lines, safe houses, and command hierarchies, were orchestrating attacks across the city. For conventional forces, dismantling such a network would have required hundreds, if not thousands, of troops, weeks of planning, and inevitably significant casualties. But for Task Force Black, this was the type of mission for which they had been meticulously trained. 60 men, operating with surgical precision, were about to take on an entire insurgent infrastructure and succeed where conventional wisdom predicted failure. The first step was intelligence integration. Operators worked hand in hand with coalition intelligence officers, Iraqi informants, and signals analysts to map the enemy's network. Every piece of information, no matter how small, a pattern of night movements, a supplier delivering weapons, a family connection between insurgents, was analyzed and used to plan targeted raids. The precision of Task Force Black's approach meant that each mission was highly focused. They struck only when the probability of success was highest, avoiding unnecessary risk. By concentrating their force and leveraging superior intelligence, the SAS could disrupt the insurgents' operations far more effectively than larger, slower units. Once a target was identified, the planning began in detail. Teams studied floor plans, street layouts, and escape routes. Operators rehearsed scenarios repeatedly, visualizing every step of the operation and every potential threat. Unlike larger forces, which relied on overwhelming firepower to compensate for uncertainty, the SAS relied on speed, surprise, and coordinated execution. Teams would move into position under cover of darkness, often inserting via helicopters or ground vehicles at precisely calculated points to avoid detection. Every movement was calculated to maintain operational security and achieve maximum effect. When the first raids began, the insurgents were caught off guard. Task Force Black moved with an efficiency that left even seasoned observers astonished. Multiple locations were struck simultaneously, cutting off potential escape routes and isolating key figures. Operators cleared rooms in seconds, neutralized threats with minimal noise and confusion, and gathered actionable intelligence that immediately informed subsequent missions. Within days, the insurgents realized they were no longer operating freely. Safe houses were compromised, supply lines disrupted, and trusted couriers suddenly disappeared. The psychological impact was immediate. Confidence turned to fear, and fear slowed their operations. Each mission built upon the previous one. Operators adapted to enemy tactics, anticipating changes and evolving strategies to maintain the advantage. They encountered insurgents who had prepared for standard military engagements, but were unprepared for the speed, stealth, and ruthlessness of Task Force Black. In some cases, insurgents attempted ambushes or booby traps only to be neutralized in moments. The SAS's training in close-quarters combat, urban navigation, and rapid decision-making proved decisive. The unit's ability to respond dynamically without waiting for orders or additional support allowed them to maintain the initiative at all times. The dismantling of the 200-strong network was not just about eliminating fighters, it was about disrupting an entire system. Task Force Black targeted leaders, logistics personnel, and communication nodes. By removing key figures and cutting off resources, the unit created chaos within the insurgent hierarchy. Operations that had once been coordinated and predictable became disorganized and reactive. The insurgents' ability to plan and execute attacks collapsed almost overnight. Each successful mission reinforced the psychological dominance of the SAS, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and paranoia among those who remained. Coordination between operators was critical. Each team operated as part of a larger system, feeding real-time intelligence back to command centers and adjusting operations on the fly. Decisions were made within seconds based on the latest information and executed with precision. Operators moved fluidly across neighborhoods from one target to another, adapting to changing circumstances without hesitation. The urban environment, once an advantage for insurgents, became a stage on which Task Force Black demonstrated unparalleled operational mastery. By the end of the first 90 days, the network that had once terrorized Baghdad was effectively dismantled. Over 200 insurgents were captured, neutralized, or forced into hiding, and the city itself began to show signs of relief from the relentless threat. The strategic implications of these operations were profound. Task Force Black had shown that a small, highly trained force could achieve results that much larger conventional units could not. By combining intelligence, precision strikes, and rapid adaptability, they had not only destroyed an enemy network, but had also reshaped the operational landscape of the city. Coalition planners took note. The human factor, the training, discipline, and instinct of elite operators had proven decisive. Technology and firepower, while important, could not replace the effectiveness of well-executed strategy and skillful execution in complex urban environments. Even in the aftermath, the lessons of Task Force Black's success were clear. The 200-strong network that had once seemed invincible had been neutralized, but the methods used, intelligence-driven operations, coordinated assaults, and psychological pressure, became a template for future special operations. The unit's efficiency and adaptability created a blueprint for modern urban warfare, demonstrating that elite teams, operating with precision and intelligence, could achieve decisive results in even the most hostile environments. Baghdad had witnessed a rare and remarkable example of small unit effectiveness, and the story of Task Force Black would become a reference point for military planners worldwide.
As the operations of Task Force Black came to a close, the full impact of their work became clear. Baghdad, once dominated by a well-entrenched insurgency, was now a city where the insurgents had lost both control and confidence. Over 200 operatives had been neutralized, supply lines disrupted, and safe houses compromised. The city itself began to change, not immediately in grand public ceremonies or visible political shifts, but in subtle, profound ways. Streets that had been avoided for fear of ambushes were now patrolled more securely. Civilians moved more freely, and the insurgency's ability to orchestrate coordinated attacks had been effectively shattered. Yet the real story was not just the outcomes on the ground, it was the lessons that Task Force Black had taught about modern warfare, human skill, and the limits of technology. One of the most significant revelations was the power of elite human operators. The Pentagon's original assessment had placed overwhelming emphasis on conventional factors, numbers, helicopters, and firepower. Yet Task Force Black had shown that these were not always the determining elements of success. 60 highly trained operators had dismantled a network that many believed required hundreds, demonstrating that expertise, coordination, and mental resilience could outweigh size and firepower. In each mission, the combination of intelligence, preparation, and split-second decision-making allowed the SAS to operate with near impossible efficiency. The human factor, the ability to read a situation, anticipate enemy moves, and act decisively, proved to be the single most valuable asset in urban combat. The psychological component of their operations was equally critical. The insurgents had become accustomed to operating freely, exploiting weaknesses in larger coalition forces. When Task Force Black struck, the speed, precision, and unpredictability of their actions created fear and uncertainty that rippled through the enemy network. Operations were not just physical, they were psychological assaults, disrupting the enemy's confidence and forcing them to act defensively. Intelligence officers noted that even the mere threat of a raid by the SAS could delay insurgent operations and compel them to take extra precautions, reducing their effectiveness. This intangible impact, fear, hesitation, and confusion, was as important as any tangible victory on the battlefield. Equally important was the lesson for coalition forces and military planners. Conventional doctrines, which often emphasize overwhelming numbers and technological superiority, had been challenged by the operations of Task Force Black. Advanced equipment, sophisticated helicopters, and heavy firepower can provide advantage, but they cannot replace the judgment, initiative, and adaptability of highly trained operators. Modern warfare, especially in urban environments, requires a blend of technology and human expertise. The SAS had demonstrated that small, flexible units, guided by superior intelligence and rigorous training, could achieve outcomes that conventional metrics would deem impossible. The success of Task Force Black also highlighted the importance of preparation and adaptability. Each mission was informed by a continuous cycle of feedback and learning. Debriefings were meticulous, analyzing every action, reaction, and environmental factor. Lessons learned were immediately applied to subsequent operations, allowing the unit to refine techniques, anticipate threats, and improve efficiency.
This iterative approach meant that the operators were constantly evolving, turning every engagement into an opportunity for improvement. By the end of their deployment, the SAS had not just neutralized a formidable enemy network, they had perfected the methodology of rapid, intelligent urban warfare. The broader implications extended beyond Baghdad. Military analysts and historians began to study these operations as a case study in small unit effectiveness. Task Force Black became a template for future special operations, emphasizing the integration of human skill, intelligence, and rapid adaptability. It demonstrated that modern warfare is not purely a function of technology or brute force, but of strategy, precision, and the ability to operate decisively in complex environments. The lesson was clear. Elite operators could multiply their effectiveness exponentially, achieving what larger conventional forces could not. At the same time, Task Force Black's operations forced a re-evaluation of risk assessment and decision-making at the Pentagon. The original warnings, which had dismissed the small SAS team as underpowered and ill-prepared, were shown to underestimate the effectiveness of skill, experience, and psychological dominance. The success of these operators highlighted a recurring problem in military planning: over-reliance on measurable factors, such as troop numbers and equipment, at the expense of the less quantifiable but often more decisive human factors. Experience, intuition, and rigorous training proved far more impactful than any numerical analysis could predict. Perhaps the most enduring lesson was about the balance between technology and human capability. While helicopters, surveillance drones, and advanced weaponry provided critical support, they were tools, not the determining factor in success. The operators' training allowed them to use these tools effectively, integrating intelligence and technology into a broader strategy of rapid, precise action. The SAS demonstrated that in urban warfare, the combination of skill, speed, and strategic thinking could dominate environments where numbers and machinery alone would fail. Modern battlefields are chaotic and unpredictable, and Task Force Black had shown that adaptability, coordination, and human judgment remain irreplaceable. The story of Task Force Black also raised questions about the future of military doctrine. If 60 men could dismantle a network that had confounded larger forces, what does this say about the design and deployment of conventional units? How can militaries integrate small, elite teams without losing the advantages of larger formations? These questions became central to planning future operations in complex environments, from counterterrorism to urban conflicts worldwide. Task Force Black had not only achieved tactical and operational success, it had reshaped thinking about modern warfare itself. As the unit returned from Baghdad, the results of their operations spoke volumes. Lives were saved, insurgent operations disrupted, and intelligence networks exposed. But the lessons extended beyond the immediate outcomes. Task Force Black had demonstrated that the human factor, training, coordination, adaptability, and courage, remains the decisive element in warfare. Technology, firepower, and numerical superiority are important, but they are amplified only by skilled, disciplined, and resilient operators. The legacy of Task Force Black is a reminder that even in the most dangerous and complex urban battlefields, the edge belongs to those who combine intellect, instinct, and unmatched preparation. By the end of 2005, Baghdad had begun to feel the tangible results of the SAS's operations. The insurgencies network had been broken, morale had plummeted, and coalition forces had gained a new understanding of the potential for small elite units to achieve monumental results. Task Force Black's success was not measured only in enemy casualties or operational victories. It was measured in the lessons it taught the military community, in the shifts it caused in strategy, and in the recognition that human skill, above all else, remains the most potent weapon in modern warfare. Their story became a benchmark, a model for elite operations worldwide, and a testament to what can be achieved when training, intelligence, and courage converge in perfect execution.